You're listening to FitPro Sessions with Parallel Coaching, Season 4, Episode 5. Hi, I'm Neil Bergman, and in today's podcast, Hayley and I are talking all about diabetes and insulin resistance for clients, so stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Neil Bergman.
And I'm Hayley Bergman. Over the last 10 years, we've helped thousands of fitness professionals to get qualified, learn with simplicity, and coach clients with confidence.
We're the first to say that learning and being a fit pro doesn't have to be hard work, and that with the right structure, support and resources, you can become a confident and knowledgeable fitness professional that is dedicated to more.
So how do you learn, qualify and kickstart as a fit pro? This is the FitPro Sessions Podcast with Parallel Coaching.
There's no way, Hayley, we would have fitted today's episode all about type 1, type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance into last week's episode
Don't
as
think
planned.
It would have fitted.
So you are blessed with an additional episode for Season 4.
Yeah, one more than we planned.
One more than we planned. The rise of common clinical conditions. And today we're deep diving into type 1, type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance.
Amazing. So,
Cool.
last week we spoke about obesity and metabolic syndrome,
Yeah.
which is really, really closely linked to talking about diabetes. So that's why we were going to put them together.
They kind of go hand in hand.
They do.
Okay. The research all stacks up that if someone is overweight, obese, the likelihood of them having and developing type 2 diabetes is literally like it's pretty much guaranteed.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those risk factors we spoke about with metabolic syndrome.
Yeah.
So there's 5 risk factors. 3 of those are needed to be classed as having metabolic syndrome. And one of those 3 that we're talking about in particular is high blood glucose levels.
Completely.
Which is what we're talking about with insulin resistance and diabetes.
Completely.
So it's
So
like totally
I'm going to
ingrained.
say, if you're joining us for the first time, okay, you need to go back and at least listen to the first 60 episodes. No, you need to go back and listen to last week's because we talk about metabolic syndrome, the 5 factors, and you need to have 3 of them. And one of them is hyperglycemia, which is the precursor to being insulin resistant, and type 2 diabetes and type 1 diabetic.
Exactly.
Now,
so this is like the extra piece to the puzzle,
yes,
isn't it?
completely. So before we get out the gates, what we must do is define the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes because they are very different. And I think from my experience of teaching exercise referral now in the classroom and online for well over a decade, majority of people don't truly understand the differences between them. And yeah, let's just go straight into it. Go for it.
So type 1 diabetes is usually hereditary in the fact that you would get it in infancy.
Yep.
Now, type 1 diabetes is the absolute non-working of our pancreas, which means we can't create any insulin.
We don't produce insulin. Okay,
Exactly. So insulin is created in these beta cells inside our pancreas.
Cool.
And this is required so that we can get glucose from our blood system into the cells.
Cool. So the cells that Hayley's talking about would be the musculature, the muscle cell.
cells.
Okay, so we can store glucose inside the muscle cell and derive that for energy later.
Yes.
Okay. We
Liver.
could put it into the liver.
Which is great for storage for later.
Yes. Or the final place would be fat storage.
Yes,
Okay. So
exactly.
there are 3 places that insulin is going to circulate in the blood and pick up blood glucose and place it in one of those 3 places.
Yes.
Now, what's really interesting is I don't have the full stats with us right now. We don't really need the full stats for what I'm about to say. Is that if your both parents have type 1 diabetes, the likelihood of a child having type 1 diabetes, I believe, is about 95%.
Wow.
Okay, but if just one of the parents have it, it's as low as 30%.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
So inside the exercise referral course, we dial into those genetic and hereditary lines of exactly the pathology of that based on one parent or 2 parents, and there's a difference between genders as well.
And the main thing with type 1 diabetes is that it's just that pancreas isn't creating any insulin at all. Now, that doesn't just have to happen from infancy. It could also be created from like a virus or...
Completely. I used to work with somebody actually
Yes, you did.
about a decade ago whereby she took a sabbatical from the company to go and travel with a partner over in South America, and after about 6 weeks she flew back in a hurry, ended up up in A&E, in intensive care, very quickly. She picked up a virus over in South America and ended up as type 1 diabetic.
And it's just an autoimmune response where the body just ends up fighting itself, and as a result, that's the thing that happens.
So with type 1 diabetes, the person must now do a number of things, and that's where they have to either inject or have some kind of insulin pump or something
outside of
us, and I can't pronounce the word.
Exogenically.
Place insulin into the body to effectively do the job of the pancreas.
Yes.
Because if we didn't have that insulin going in, okay, and we continue to consume food and drink, okay, our blood glucose will continually increase, and that could lead to diabetic coma, that could effectively lead to death, and a whole host of other complications, and the severity is just huge.
And also it means that they're not getting any energy out. So there's not getting any
you're
glucose.
You're putting food and drink in, you're digesting that, it's now circulating in the blood, but it's not going into the muscle to be used as skeletal muscle energy. It's not going to the liver or to fat cells.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're constantly placing food in, but not getting any return for that food.
Absolutely. So
drink.
It's not working effectively.
So you must have a fully functioning pancreas secreting insulin, producing insulin to do its job for the body to bring about this physiological occurrence.
Yeah, but in the world we live in, we're able to control that through medications.
Completely.
Which means that insulin can be injected, or like you said, via a pump.
And we had a learner on a course a few years ago that had an insulin pump, which was phenomenal, because he came on the exercise referral course and we started talking about this, and you could see him smiling away, and he kind of pulled up his t-shirt and there was this pump connected to his left hip that was doing the job effectively of his pancreas.
Amazing. So it meant he didn't actually have to go and inject any insulin at any point. The pump done it for him. Still had to do some manual tests.
What I loved about that though, the insulin pump, and I've worked with a few clients with the insulin pump, is that I don't want to use the word they can live a normal life, because anyone can live a normal life with any condition. It goes to show it's about how it's managed and the behaviour around the condition and the medication.
Yeah.
So this learner and the clients I've worked with, they knew, let's just work with this learner. He knew what time breakfast, lunch and dinner was, and he knew what types of food he was going to consume. Therefore, he could really manage the pump to benefit his lifestyle. Now, should have anything changed, he would have had to have adjusted the pump. Okay, so you've got to have quite a strict routine. And I think that's one of the things I've learned with working with type 1 diabetics, is the management of the client around their routine. So they've come to me for to get fit, to get into the gym, to get moving, to challenge their diet, but ultimately it comes back to, dare I say, behavioural change, and sitting down over a cup of tea and coffee and talking about time management, morning routines, evening routines. What meals are we gonna have spread across the month? When are our breakfast, lunch and dinner's going to be? When are our snacks going to be?
So really like lifestyle coaching and behaviour
completely.
change, even though it's not a lifestyle condition.
Yes.
So type 1 diabetes isn't a lifestyle based condition. They haven't got it because they've been operating out of lifestyle in any way. And actually only 10% of those that are diagnosed with diabetes is type 1.
Type 1 diabetes, completely. So what if you're on screen, and we'll put this in my show notes as well, but one of the things, it's quite an old book this, but it's the Concise Guide to Medicines and Drugs. Now, as an exercise referral specialist, I understand exercise and nutrition and behaviour change in relation to the condition, and therefore the considerations and the adaptations that I need to make.
Yeah.
Now then, I'm going to say almost 99.9% of the people I've worked with diabetes or any of the conditions, they've come to me and they've not fully understood their condition or their medication or what they need to do throughout the day to actually manage their condition.
And also how that works
Some
with
have
exercise.
Some have had an amazing journey, and they've had a diabetic nurse and they've sat down with them, but the time frames of these appointments are so short. Yet I've always found that, the majority of my client sessions are 45-50 minutes. So I've usually been, dare I say, the first person to truly sit down and give time and focus and listen. And if you change the letters of listen, you get silent. So I've been able to sit there with them in silence and really consider where they are right now and think, how do we move forwards? How can I build huge amounts of relationship and empathy and rapport to see how we could benefit your lifestyle right now, okay? Even though you've got this medication.
Regardless of your condition.
Regardless of your condition. And that's where this book comes in, because you can sit down, you can open up and really find out, like, what are the special precautions? What are the interactions with you and this drug? What are the general informations? And you can really dive through, dare I say, all of the jargon.
Yeah.
Okay,
you can go in depth, can't you, to really understand.
And there's so much confusion, and yet we can, as a coach, break all that confusion and truly be the first person to say, right, what you need to do, what I'm going to help you with, what we're going to do together is say, right, here's your morning routine. This is when you're going to have your medication. That's what you've been prescribed. You must have X, Y, and Z.
You're having, yeah.
Okay. Based on your medication, based on all the guidance, this would be the ideal breakfast. You're going to have your breakfast at this time based on your medication.
Yeah.
And because of that, we're now going to train at this particular time. Now, that might be of some inconvenience to you. However, you can't train at any other time because of your medication unless you want to get up an hour earlier.
Yeah.
So you can have some really great world-class questions and conversations about managing, helping them become, I dare I say, ownership of their own life.
What I love about what you're saying there is that the deeper your knowledge goes as the coach, as the FitPro, you're able to then impart that knowledge on somebody that's probably lived with this condition for years.
Yeah.
They can still learn so much from you.
Yeah, because as a FitPro, we talk
progress.
so much about like sets, reps, tempo, time. We call that our 5 R's and a V, and we love planning, we love training, we have our favourite exercises. Yet you're going to get a client that comes in that goes, well, this doesn't fit my mold anymore. This doesn't fit my way of planning. And there's so much more to it than just making the assumption of, well, you've got an insulin pump, you manage it okay,
let's go. Fit in with my plan that I do for everyone else.
Yeah, completely. And that's where the law, I'm going to say it again, of individuality comes into play.
That's a major part, especially with conditions. And I know this whole season is about conditions and the fact that they're rising.
Yeah.
But like, you can see how if every person that has a condition immediately means that you can't treat them like anybody else, not that we should treat everyone the same anyway necessarily.
No, completely.
But like, that individuality law is so much more important.
I think what I love about this is, like, no one individual can be treated the same, but what you can do is you can work with one type of person, and therefore now you're not going to have a generic plan, but you now know that the same common questions are always going to come up.
Common problems,
common hurdles. So if you really want to help people with type 1 or type 2 diabetes, you now know the types of things that are going to go into your plan, such as, well, what medication are you on? What time can you have that medication? What's your morning routine? What's your evening routine? Here's the types of foods you're gonna consume. Do you see where I'm going? So you've got not generic information, but you've got specific niche information.
And what reminded me when you say that is I used to work with somebody that was type 1 diabetic, and she had this idea that she could never exercise because she was type 1 diabetic. Yep. And that was her fixed belief. But when we dived in a little bit deeper and I asked questions and sort of understood where this came from, essentially when the first time she ever tried exercise, which was quite a few years back, it didn't go well, in the fact that she didn't have the guidance there. She also tried to cut out foods at the same time. She was trying to restrict in the same way as every other diet.
So she had this world view built upon a faulty belief many years ago.
Yeah, and she's like, well, therefore I can't exercise. But it was liberating to be able to teach her and understand her thoughts and processes, but also then teach her that is still possible.
And that's why I think what I love about working with conditions, or any client really, it doesn't matter if you're working with somebody with type 1 diabetes or you're working with an athlete that's perfectly healthy, fit and got a normal working pancreas, is actually a good coach is a world-class question asker. A world-class question asker. Because if I come at it as a coach and I go, I'm going to ask you a world-class question, you're going to give me a world-class answer, and we can now move forwards. The reason that any client is in a bit of a kerfuffle or a problem is because they're asking the wrong question towards their problem. Okay?
Yeah.
There we go. And I've got to come at it from a different perspective and go, right, well, let's ask this question. And go, okay, there's a new answer. Go, cool, that's led us down this client-centered path and say, right, there's a new question, world-class question, new answer, and off we go.
And sometimes you don't know what a world-class question is unless you have that deeper level of knowledge.
Completely.
So for example, let's bring it back to type 1 diabetes in the fact that they have insulin injections regularly. If you don't know where they are in terms of on their body, the site of that insulin injection, then you don't know how to respond with that with exercise, for example.
Do you know what? It reminds me, I worked with a lady actually many years ago. It was like 2009, 2010. A lady called Mandy who only injected in 1 or 2 sites. Okay. And then when we got into a kind of a consultation, it was like a second or third consultation, I said, where do you inject? And she was like, really, not like China Wall came up, but like, why have you asked me that question? It's quite an odd question. I think she thought it might, I don't know. Quite personal. But we'd had a lot of other personal questions at this point anyway. She told me where she was for the 2 sites. And I was like, cool. Are you able to inject in any other sites? Have you tried any other sites? And she said, yeah, I could do here, here, or here, or here. I go, cool. Well,
as we have leg day coming up.
As we have leg day coming up, you might not want to inject in that particular site because, and she showed me her part of her body, various parts of her body were quite bruised
and scarred.
Completely.
Yeah.
And so, just by giving that like option or opportunity to say, well, actually I could add a bit more variety to these injection sites and take some of the kind of body parts and stop battering them, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay, which were her particular words, I remember it, was now she could enjoy some of the exercise sessions from a different perspective.
And even after an exercise session, can you imagine, like with DOMs anyway, can you imagine then injection, or you're not wanting to get to the point of having DOMs in fear of having injection?
In fear of it, that was my point.
Yeah.
But also that could impact range of movement, just general comfort, fear avoidance.
Yeah.
Well,
it manifests in like this cycle,
yeah,
right?
Completely. And so just asking like a really simple question of like, where do you inject? Actually opened up a cascade of other questions that impacted my planning.
Nice.
And I genuinely do believe that she walked away from that going, that was a bit of a strange question. But actually further down, once we started exercising and actually doing different days, she was like, actually, this makes sense now. There's method to Neil's madness. He's actually applying the science behind a smart, planned approach.
Yes.
I like that.
And knowing about how the condition can get worse over time if it's not monitored.
Yes.
Because then you can really look for those signs and symptoms in their training sessions, in the questions you ask. And I think that's really key. Like you said about the insulin sites, for example, the same applies for so many different areas.
Well, the more you work with a client, the more you really get to know them. And I genuinely believe, again, that I know some of my clients more than they probably know themselves, or that their closest loved ones know them. Because you get to spend a lot of time with them. And as you go through a session, you build up this huge amount of rapport and relationship. And they start to confide in you, and they tell you stuff about their world. And so you really get to understand their eating habits, their relationship with food, their drink, their sleeping routines and whatnot, and really understand what is the normal day in the life of Brian. Does that make sense? And so when Brian turns up and he's slightly off track, and because you're not living with them 24/7, it's so easy as a coach to see that. And so you go, well, why is Brian off track? So you can ask another different set of questions, and you could be the first person to quickly add a referral back and say, hold on a minute, what's happened in your day? And that could have a huge ramification or cascade effect on their quality of life or their condition.
Yeah.
And the amount of clients that I've referred back to a GP because they've been slightly off track. Okay.
And that's that real small, intricate level of observation and questioning.
It sounds really silly. The client lives in their body 24/7, 365. And so sometimes it's really hard for the client to recognise what's going on.
It's easy to justify as well. Like if you think on a day when you feel a little, it's just bad weather today, like I feel a bit down.
Yeah.
And it's easy to justify from yourself, whereas somebody else looking in, like you guys as coaches, as a FitPro, and you looking in, you can actually see these links that might be something else.
Like a really simple one would be, one of the signs and symptoms would be excessive thirst in diabetes type 1 and type 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Brian might come in and he might, on an average session, consume, I don't know, let's say half a litre of water, but he brings a litre bottle in. And over the last few sessions, you notice that he's drinking the full litre.
Yeah.
So I could just ask a real open question, or a question, just say, how much water do you drink throughout the day?
Generally, yeah.
Okay, and I could just keep a record of that and just see that actually water's going up and up and up and up. And he's saying just odd comments of like, I'm really thirsty, or, you could see him kind of licking his lips, where he's like gasping for more water, or maybe early signs of dehydration. And so he's constantly wanting to take more water in. Well, that's kind of an early, maybe red flag.
And one of the other red flags would be about foot care.
Yes.
So with foot care in particular, this is a major part of both type 1 and type 2 diabetes.
Diabetes. What now? So before you go down that route,
I want to
with
explore
foot
what
care,
hypoglycemia is in a moment.
we've said about type 1 diabetes being the pancreas isn't working. I think it's probably worth, before we go down the foot care side of things, because it's a crucial part, I think we need to go and do what is type 2 diabetes.
We probably should.
Because we could waffle on all day.
Some terms that we've thrown up as well, like hypoglycemia, I want to dive into that as well. So let's go type 2 diabetes. I'll try to say it properly rather than diabetes.
Diabetes. Oh my God. Anyway, so here we go. So type 2 diabetes
is more lifestyle related.
Yes.
And it is incredibly linked to obesity and rising waistlines.
Completely.
So
it's usually adult onset.
Yes.
Okay, so if you rewind, say 20, 30 years, it would have been somebody in their late 50s, 60s, 70s that would have predictably, had onset of type 2 diabetes. But what we're seeing now, as we're going through, 2000, 2010, 2020 and so forth, is younger and younger generations are developing what was once adult onset diabetes.
Yes.
And ultimately this is I'm going to say an unhealthy relationship with life. It's inactivity, smoking, alcohol, and food that's having an impact on
the body. So there's two different parts of how it can be manifested with type 2 diabetes. One is similar to what we said with type 1 diabetes, whereby the insulin's just not working as much. So you're just not producing quite enough. There's still a little bit.
You're still producing insulin, but you're not keeping up with the
volume's not there.
Volume. So
not to where it needs to be.
So you're consuming or doing something in your daily life that is placing more blood glucose.
Well, if I eat a packet of biscuits compared to just one biscuit,
yes,
I'm going to need more insulin.
Completely.
So remember we said that
if you're constantly overloading the body system, then you've got to produce more insulin. So the first part of type 2 diabetes is you're just not producing enough insulin to meet the demand of what's going in.
Exactly. Or the other half, the other side of it is what we call insulin resistance. Now, insulin resistance is whereby the cells of the body, so we said like the muscle cells, the liver, the fat cells, aren't recognizing insulin anymore.
So the pancreas is still producing insulin. It's just that the muscle cell, the liver, and the fat cell doesn't recognize this insulin as the key to let blood glucose in.
Yeah, I like that you said the key. So insulin, it acts like a key in a lock.
Wicked. I like this analogy.
Essentially, if you imagine you've got sugar or glucose floating around in the blood, that glucose needs to get across the barrier into those muscle cells, liver cells, fat cells.
And the only way it can do that is with insulin, and that's the key. Yep. So insulin resistance is a bit like having a rusty key or a rusty lock.
Yes, rusty locks.
Okay, so the blood glucose isn't able to be shunted or cross over and be stored in the fat cell in the adipocyte or within the skeletal muscle or liver.
Yeah.
Cool.
Which means that the blood sugar levels just keep rising.
And the pancreas keeps churning out as much insulin as it possibly can, but it's not being recognized. So you become insulin resistant.
Over a period of time.
Yep.
So to start off with, it might just be a few locks that are a bit rusty, and then it kind of builds up so that you've got more and more locks are rusty and you just can't get on top of it. But especially if the diet and lifestyle are still not in check.
Completely. So if you continue to go down that rusty road, okay, and you have this lifestyle where you've got unhealthy relationship with life, unhealthy relationship with food, drink, smoking, inactivity, high fat, etc., then you're going to end up from being insulin resistant to pre-diabetic to type 2 diabetic.
Yes.
Okay, which is where you could end up on medication to effectively help your pancreas do the job.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what you would do a fasting blood glucose test. There's a couple of different medical assessments to ascertain whether or not you're type 2 diabetic.
Yeah. And then
to get to that point. But ultimately what you're looking for would be for blood glucose to sit between 3 and 5 millimole per litre of blood. Okay, it could go up as say between 4 and 7, 3 and 7,
Yep.
still within somewhat of a healthy range. Okay, but what you'll find is somebody that is
fasted and 8 and over.
8 and over would be classified as diabetic. Now what you're seeing is if you've got a really unhealthy relationship with life, food, drink, activity, smoking, alcohol, etc., stress, sleep, there's loads of things that affect blood glucose overall, but effectively you're going to see this blood glucose be in the double digits. Okay.
Yes.
And I've had clients turn up and say like, I'm all ready to train, I feel okay, I think, and they would take a blood glucose test and it'd be like 28. Okay, millimole per litre of blood. I'm like, we are not training today.
Well, there's a limit actually, because the danger with hyperglycemia, I think that's the place to start before we look at the limits. So hyperglycemia, as the word suggests, hyper meaning high and glycemia meaning about glucose in the blood. So you've got high glucose in the blood, that's hyperglycemia. Now, in the short term, that could just manifest itself in feeling hungry and thirsty and tired because you're not getting the nutrients that you've just eaten go into the cells
that required it.
But long term, if you have a long period of time whereby you've got high blood glucose levels, you actually increase the corrosive nature around your blood, which is it becomes acidic as such. Now, as a result, it can create huge damage all around the body.
So you're not going to work or train with anybody, I believe, above 13 millimole.
Oh, in the moment.
Completely. Yeah. So if somebody turns up and they say, they're type 2 diabetic and it's, I don't know, let's say Anthea is at, let's just give her this name. I think somebody would be pleased we got that in there.
She'll be pleased with that.
Anthea's the client. Let's just say they're at, say, 9.5.
Yeah.
As an exercise referral specialist, I can still train with them, but make on-the-spot adaptations to the intensity, the timings, the types of things I do in my warm-up and cool down to really work with this client to manage the client in the moment of that session that benefits them in spite of their condition, medication and current blood glucose. But anything above 13, it's like not going to go down. Anthea cannot train.
She cannot train, and it has to be stable and in that sort of zone. If it's more than 13, the reason for that is because exercise can do one or two things to glucose levels. It can send it up. So you can get exercise-induced hyperglycemia, which takes it up even further. So Anthea comes to you with a 13 or a 14 or a 28 and you're like, okay, the danger here is that she doesn't realise it's high necessarily. She just feels okay when she starts. She starts exercising and several things happen. One thing, ketones increase in the body alongside the high blood glucose level. That increases the glucose level generally throughout the whole session. And the other is the stress response from the exercise increases catecholamines in the blood, which then increases the response to make the blood glucose level go even higher.
And of course, now you've just used skeletal muscle. So you've burned through your stored energy. So now after the session, not only are you maybe a little bit more dehydrated and hungry because you've now emptied the stored muscle glycogen, you're now going to want to go and have this I need to eat. You're going to have immediate hangry moment of Anthea, I must eat now. Do you know what I mean?
It could be really dangerous for Anthea though, because if she's not getting that nutrients to where she needs it, it can cause problems with concentration.
Focus.
It can cause problems with sort of you say the angry nature, emotions.
Well also if somebody has those feelings of I must eat now, and yet there's been this whole cascade of high blood glucose, and yet there's this I'm excessive thirst, I'm hungry. the likelihood is, with now being educated, Anthea could choose the wrong meal. Okay, which then impacts the next her medication. That might be where she injects, or maybe not, but it could just impact overall blood glucose level for the next 24, 36, 72
and also,
hours.
if that happened to you, you wouldn't necessarily go, oh, that was amazing, I feel really good.
Well,
after
yeah,
that
completely.
session.
Let's be
I'm
honest.
not going back. Anthea is not coming back.
Exactly.
So
I think you've hit the nail on the head, because it comes back to this whole feeling of like, we do more of what we enjoy. So if you've just gone through that whole point of like, yeah, my blood glucose were high to start off with, and now through exercise I've had this whole cascade effect, and I feel like a train's just hit me. You're not like, yeah, bring on the next session, that was amazing.
doesn't work like that.
And yet our biggest thing we're here to promote is health and fitness. Is this adherence, this point of like, do you know what? You really considered the plan. And I can see how today, if today was a domino, that knocks over the domino that gets me through to tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And I feel that if I continue knocking these daily dominoes over, by the end of the month, I'm going to be at this point towards my goal of managing my condition, or, you know, I can still have a performance related goal. They can still go and do a 10K if they wanted to, or couch to 5K, or park run, or do a lifting competition, or do their 10 pull-ups. They can still work. It's got to be managed, but they've got to be able to sit there at the end of every day and go, do you know what I did today benefits me health-wise and fitness-wise.
Yeah, I remember years ago, there was this lady that used to come to my circuit session, and she actually was a whole family. And on one of the sessions, I remember her coming back and she said, last time was terrible. And this place was in the middle of nowhere, this gym. But she literally had to drive home afterwards. And I was like, well, tell me more about it. She was like, I got lost. She's like, I've done that journey so many times and I got lost. She said she ended up 10 miles away from where she was supposed to be. I was like, how did you do that? Like, you're an adult. How did you not get home?
How did you get lost?
You've been here loads. And she said that it was down to her diabetes and her lack of control in the session and after. She hadn't eaten well during the day, but she basically had gone hypoglycemic, so really low, to the point it caused massive confusion. And she said before it's happened that whereby she lost sort of sense of control of where she was. It all kind of didn't make sense in the normal way, like proper brain foggy. So she actually ended up totally in the wrong place, and her husband had to come and collect her. But if she'd got any worse with that could have resulted in her passing out. It could have resulted in a coma. So
or just the basics of a car crash.
And well, yeah, that too.
Let's reverse a little bit.
And what had happened is she basically come to a circuit session whereby she wasn't necessarily well controlled throughout the day. She'd had a very high stress day. She hadn't really eaten properly. And then as she left circuits, she had a massive stressor in the fact that she had to rush to get home because something had happened with her kid. I don't think it was anything major, but it ended up being the point that it caused stress. And then that whole impact meant that she didn't take her normal sort of Lucozade that she'd have for afterwards, she didn't top up.
But if you think of the stress response, the body stress response is to deal with the stress right now. Well, you've just been through I think a lot of fit pros don't fully appreciate that exercise itself is a stressor, and that's a stress response sympathetic pathway.
Yeah.
And so now the body is going to release a whole host of hormones to deal with the stress of that, and now cascaded or coupled with the news of like, I must get home to my daughter. There's now
rushed.
a new stress response to release blood glucose to bring about the physiological demand of rushing through the changing rooms, getting dressed quickly. Is everyone going to be okay? Getting in the car, having that accuracy, having that focus, pupil dilation, to concentrate on the road, to speed up heart rate, to deal with it. All of this comes with a stress response of effectively, how do I manage blood glucose as well?
And she got lost as a result. Yeah, and so it just kind of shows the severity. It's not necessarily the things we might think about, but they're so severe in the fact that the slippery slope of it could just sound so menial of like, oh, she was a bit stressed today.
Yes, completely.
But because of the condition and what's going on inside, the risk of it becomes so much higher.
Completely. One of the things that, I think one of the key medications that comes up a lot with diabetic clients is metformin.
Yes.
Okay. Which I think has got a couple of different names for it.
Yes, so it's a biguanide, which is the overarching name, and then one of those underneath it is metformin.
Cool. So just very quickly for those listening and watching, what does that do?
So metformin is more about insulin sensitivity in the fact that it helps you become more sensitive to the insulin that you're already producing.
Okay, cool.
It also can help stimulate a little bit more insulin to be produced if needed.
Cool. But one of the kind of a side effects of this is feeling nauseous and feeling confused and feeling dizzy and vomiting. Now, if somebody is on this medication and that's how they feel, the likelihood is they're probably not going to want to do a PHA circuit. Or to go and do a Tabata.
Do a Tabata sprint.
So whilst this person is a normal person and they can do pretty much anything anyone can do, we need to be really mindful of the time duration given from a warm-up and how we transition them through a series of exercises that leaves them feeling high in self-confidence, high in self-worth, and high in self-belief, and high in self-efficacy.
Well, if you feel nauseous, the last thing you want to do, let's say like burpees, where you're going down to the floor and back up, down to the floor and back up.
Range of movement.
Yeah,
completely.
It can make you feel really dizzy, it can make you feel sick anyway, let alone if you've got these symptoms coming up.
And that's just one of the considerations going forward.
Well, like one of them was sweating.
Yeah,
so you might turn around and say
if someone's on metformin, they might sweat more. So you can say, well, okay, so if they're in the office during the day and they're sweating, you can say, well, maybe that is a reaction or a side effect to the metformin. However, if they do experience the side effect of excessive sweating and now they're going through, let's just say, a spin class, okay, which is going to have a stress response again, you're going to increase blood glucose because of the exercise. Now they're sweating. Are they sweating because of the metformin? Or are they sweating excessively because of a spin class? It's up to me as a instructor, as a coach, to go, do you know what? I've genuinely got your back here. I came into this industry to help people, and it's my job, my duty to have that knowledge to truly help you get from the front of the session to the back of a session, knowing that you've consumed something because part of your body doesn't work properly, aka metformin, okay? And that comes with a series of side effects. Yeah. And I need to manage your frequency, intensity, type, and time. Yeah, nice. More so the intensity, and plan a really smart session to go, do you know what? This is because of the, how do you feel right now? Do you know what? That's the number one question you can ask. I don't think you can never get bored of that.
How are you feeling right now?
As a referral coach, if you ever feel yourself going, do you know what? I've said the words, how do you feel? And you think, oh, when's Anthea gonna kind of catch on and say, you ask that question an awful lot.
On a scale of 1 to 10.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel? If you're not asking that at least once a minute, you're almost doing the client a disservice.
And you don't know.
You don't know.
Especially if they're showing up things of like redness in the face or sweating as a result of a medication, not necessarily of how they actually
completely.
And we've said it on other ones of these season 4 as well, but what I'm always astounded at about exercise referral and working with conditions is that it's just not about beasting your client.
No,
it's just not about going hell for leather and going, there you go, you burnt a load of calories, you're ready. Yeah. Because it's actually about the slow and steady wins the race over a long period of time.
Completely.
We said this
because
with
ultimately
obesity
somebody
last
with
week.
type 1, type 2 insulin resistance is what we're trying to do, more so for type 2 and insulin resistant, is to make them insulin sensitive. So we're trying to provide a stimulus, a light stress on the body for them to go, wake up insulin, do the job.
Insulin sensitivity is like a little bit of WD-40 on those locks we were talking about. It frees everything up so you can take that insulin in.
And this is where NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, really comes into play. Do you know, for wins just from increasing someone's NEAT, more so in the early stages over someone's EAT, their exercise activity thermogenesis, like, it's a phenomenal
NEAT,
win.
You mean like steps, moving around the house,
non-planned activity.
Things you've not planned.
Completely. Nice. And you had a study from the University of New Mexico.
Yeah, and this is in the Journal of Obesity, but they had 3 groups and their aim was to look at how insulin sensitivity can be caused. So how do you get someone to be more insulin sensitive? So they looked at basically achieving weight loss through different means and the effect that had on insulin. So the first means was to achieve 10% weight loss through diet and exercise.
Because ultimately, let's just go back. Like, let's just get rid of that caveat as well. Is for somebody that reduces their weight, because the likelihood of this person being overweight, obese is they correlate.
Yeah,
like
massively.
Massively. So actually, the reduction of weight is a very good cursor to say if they reduce their weight, their insulin sensitivity increases.
Yes, it changes
completely
exactly.
because they reduce fat mass and therefore their lean mass goes up.
Yes,
percentage-wise, completely.
Yeah.
Cool.
So this first group that used diet and nutrition to get the 10%. I said it again: diet and exercise to get
diet, nutrition, and food
to get a 10% reduction in weight. They achieved 80% improvement on their insulin sensitivity.
So they had an 80% improvement on insulin sensitivity because they did two things. They moved more and ate healthier.
Yes,
completely.
And they got the 10% reduction.
Completely.
The other group got a 10% reduction in weight still, so weight was still the factor, but they didn't have any exercise involved. It was just diet, and they only improved by 38%.
So it goes to show that we
difference.
must be providing activity and nutritional guidance, and the only way we're going to get long-lasting change through both of those is through behavior change. Did the client do what they said they were going to do, and did we hold them accountable and find out all of the daily process goals to actually get them there to knock that domino over?
Do you want to know the other really interesting part of this group?
Go for it.
Is that the third group just had exercise. They didn't achieve the 10% weight loss. And as a result, they also didn't change much in their insulin sensitivity.
Oh, wow.
So it does show that you need that holistic approach of diet and exercise. It is not just, well, they come to my sessions and I do exercise with them because that could have a minimal, if not any response, unless it's combined with the nutrition.
Completely.
Wow.
I like that. I like it. Now, the thing for me is on this is all about the numbers of people as well. Like at the beginning of this FitPro session, we talked about if we went back 20, 30 years, okay? Now, if we do that and we go back to roughly early 90s, I think looking down at the notes, per year, those diagnosed or those...
Oh, it's massively on the rise. So in 1993, it was 1.4 million people had diabetes as a diagnosis.
Whereas today, somewhat, what's that, 93, so 27 years later, so almost 30 years.
Yeah, it's now 3.5 million.
So it's doubled in the last 30 years.
It's due to go up by another 2 million in the next 10 years.
So the line of best fit is just rising and rising and rising.
It's a really steep curve.
So if you think about, if you had, let's just say 100 clients, or if you're working in club and you do, let's just say body attack, a circuit session, a Les Mills, conditioning class, legs, bums and tums, spinning, and you've got a number of clients, let's just say you see 100 people across the week, 100 different people, the likelihood of having somebody come in that's type 1 pre-diabetic, type 1 diabetic, pre-diabetic, type 2 diabetic or insulin resistant, it's guaranteed. Yeah. It's absolutely guaranteed.
It's something like 1 in 16 people have it.
Which is why at the beginning of the session, you would ask a verbal screen, not just has everybody signed a PAR-Q, but also, is there anything else I must know? You might get a brand new client come into your local gym you work at, Pure Gym or the gym group, whatever, okay? Then they haven't declared, I suppose, or you're aware of their PAR-Q, that they have, let's say, type 2 diabetes, and now that's the idea of a verbal screen. That's the verbal screen to say, is there anything else as an instructor I must know before we get going? Because I've got your back. If you've got something that I need to know about, I know I can work with you.
Yes.
But also, if they do have type 2 diabetes and they turn up to your spin class,
there's a certain extra verbal screen needed. Is this what you were going to say?
Well, yeah, but also they shouldn't be in your class.
Unless you're exercise referral.
Completely, because actually what you're about to do is to take a group of people through a generic plan, even though it's planned, that doesn't fit this person's day.
Yeah.
You could be having, although exercises, like Hayley just said, has a massive impact on insulin sensitivity and managing, actually the session you're about to deliver could actually have more stress or impact on a negative route pathway than a positive route.
Yes. So that's screening at the beginning to know that that is somebody that should be in the group.
Completely.
And also sometimes it's not obvious. So if somebody's lived with type 1 diabetes all their life, they might not see that as a reason to tell you about it because they've lived with it all their life.
Yeah.
Why would they then tell their spin instructor?
Yeah.
So it's important that you do check.
One of the guys actually that did our exercise referral probably about 2014, 2015 when we taught it inside the classroom at our last venue in Milton Keynes. What he does is really, really clever. On his social media, he talks about these conditions.
Nice.
On a, I'm going to say not a daily basis, but it's every other day. Something comes up about a condition or that he's knowledgeable and qualified and knows about it. And then he tries to divert as many of the people he talks to in club to his social platforms.
Oh, nice.
Which means it's kind of that early barrier breakdown for Bob, who comes into the gym that has type 1 diabetes, to go, I didn't realise I was meant to make you aware of this.
Nice.
And so it's that kind of first point of like, this person gets me, understands me. It does make a difference. That's why I'm here. I'm here to help myself health-wise. I need to lose a little bit of weight, a little bit of timber, but I do have type 1 diabetes. And so now a message goes across on Facebook or whatever, on an email, and say, actually, I want to join your spin class. How does this impact you? Can I do it? And he's like, yeah, and you come. Now this person knows that Bob's turning up and he can make adaptations.
Yes.
So he uses his social media platform, already qualified, to kind of break down those early barriers and just points as many people towards it as possible.
I think that also differentiates him, so that if somebody has those conditions or has conditions, they're more likely to go to him than somebody that is inequipped to deal with them.
Completely.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that's. It just amazes me of how this condition is more prevalent today than it is 30 years ago. It's more than doubled in the last 27 years. And if we go back from 1993 and go back 27 or 30 years, we're talking, 1963, 1965, the numbers are even half that again. So what we've seen is not just this like steady slope, it's the last 30 years of like, whoop, it's gone straight up.
Yeah, exactly. And that's because it's a lifestyle condition. So remember, all of the ones that we've spoken about that link back to metabolic syndrome do the same. It's like if you had tracing paper and you laid them all on top of each other.
Exactly, yeah.
They'd all have the same kind of graph at the same sort of time.
And it would be of complete correlation when you looked at hypertension, which was episode 2. And you think if someone's got an unhealthy relationship with food, okay, which is one of the factors that is, if it's taking someone to be insulin resistant, okay, is going to have an impact on hypertension as well.
Yes. And hypercholesterolemia. And then that can affect...
Which now leads to metabolic syndrome and obesity. You can see how these literally are almost like brother and sister the whole way through.
Massively relate.
Completely.
And I think also when we look back at that graph and how it's just going up and up and up, I think it shows our importance as Fit Pros to put that health back into what we're doing as health and fitness professionals, because not one of us can just stop that. It's not down to one trainer, it's down to all of us to be able to like help people reduce that curve again.
Completely. And
prevent it.
It's amazing how much of an impact you can have on just one person's quality of life as well. Because you mentioned it earlier about foot care. We haven't gone there, and I want to talk about it because we've both had clients, and actually the sole focus has been around. So put some perspective, some context on this. They've had an unhealthy relationship with life, an unhealthy relationship with food. They've been on medication. Medications have gone up. Type 2 diabetes for me, I'm talking about here. And they've not managed their condition very well. And so blood glucose continues to rise. And what Hayley said earlier is as the blood glucose continues to rise, the acidic nature of the blood glucose goes up, and that can damage nerve endings around the body. So some of the things we talk about in exercise referral is one of the things is called retinopathy, where the back of the eyes or part of the eye, the nerves and blood vessels deteriorate because of the amount of blood glucose and the acidic nature around that region.
Which can lead to sight impairment or blindness.
Completely.
I had a client that was blind as a result of his diabetes that was poorly managed.
But amazingly, not oddly, over a period of time, I remember you working with this client and them ended up running on a treadmill even though they were blind.
Yeah,
and that just amazes me that, that this person in their youth was a good runner and now they find themselves, I think, what is he, late 60s?
Yeah.
On the treadmill, running again, and he thought he would never run again. Okay, but it took months to get to that point.
Long time.
Now, the clients I've worked with is where they've had peripheral neuropathy. So we're talking about the periphery being the limbs.
So also you said neuropathy. So this is of the nerves.
Yes. Okay.
So
and we're talking about the lower limbs. So we're talking about the damage to really below the knee, more so in the foot, and where you can get damage to the... Well, you go into it.
Yeah, so peripheral neuropathy is the effect of the nerves. So the nerve becomes damaged, which means you don't have the same sensation or the same blood flow around that area, which means that if somebody gets let's say a blister or a scratch, it doesn't heal. And then that gets worse and worse and worse over time because the circulation isn't there.
Yeah.
Also can lead to swelling, and swelling can cause cracks and ulcers and all sorts on the leg. Doesn't heal. Now, over time, that can get worse and get infected. It can actually turn to gangrene and then lead to amputation as well.
Like just this one disease can lead to a quality of life that it's just crazy.
And you wouldn't necessarily link, if I mistreat my glucose levels, I might lose my foot or leg.
Exactly. Now, we've both had clients, and we've seen it in various journals as well that we've read, whereby a client has stood on something and not realised that they've stepped on it.
Yes. I heard actually from a paediatrician? Yeah, podiatrist. Yeah. Not a paediatrician, that's for kids. A podiatrist
it's late in the day we're recording this, so...
That's right. A podiatrist that I used to work with said that she had a client come to her that was hobbling a bit, had lots of pain underneath her foot. She was type 2 diabetic. Very, very overweight, and as a result of being obese, she had limited range of movement to be able to look after her own feet.
Great point.
So she couldn't clip her own nails, for example. She couldn't clean around her feet. She couldn't wash them in a shower.
And dry them. That was my client I'm going to talk about, yeah.
And as a result, she actually couldn't feel much that was happening in her legs as a result of the peripheral neuropathy. Now, the story goes that this lady had come to her with like hard calluses on the bottom of her feet, and the podiatrist was sort of scratching...
Not the paediatrician.
scratching away at the bottom of the feet and removing things, and she actually found a 2p piece inside the skin underneath the foot. God knows how long it had been there. And I never knew this client. It's not one of mine. It was from the podiatrist. But she basically was found this 2p piece under the skin of the foot.
Can you imagine
and she had no
body
idea it was
weight
there.
stepping down on that?
And she was
changing
obese.
Gait and changing the weight distribution, changing the dynamics of movement of every step of a day.
And
the
also,
impact that had on her low back, the impact that had on her posture, her breathing, her comfort,
it shows
her
the
activity.
difference though, doesn't it, and how we can put up with things or not sense things.
Yes.
So if you or I were to stand on a 2p piece today,
you would know about
you'd know about it, let alone if it was still on your foot when you then moved to a different room or put another pair of shoes on.
I worked with one lady, and she had already reported, certainly early on and on a referral, that she'd had quite bad health with her feet. And so we had a couple of extra sessions at the beginning, which were what I class as head sessions, extra consultations. And I think that's one thing I really want to pass inside exercise referral is usually we talk about this double consultation, but with some clients, there's no
triple or
quadruple consultations. It's not necessarily about getting active straight away. It's making sure that you really do understand where we're heading together as a team.
No.
And so quite early on, we had a good laugh actually. She was a real good, a lot of banter straight out the gate. Anyway, bad foot health, and it was the fact she was a big lady, big BMI. I think it was like BMI 43. She didn't have the range of movement or dexterity to dry her feet, and so her feet were constantly cracked and on that point of being blisters and just
that leads to ulcerations.
Completely. So one of the things we used to do is I used to time some of her sessions with the podiatrist who used to come in and look at her feet, and they used to really look after her feet, wrap her feet up, dry her feet, okay, put socks on her that actually worked for her, and then every session I would then help her put her shoes and socks on. And do you know what? To this day, she would still thank me for the time and attention of that. Because if she put her shoes on, she wouldn't do them up properly. So now the risk of falls went sky high. And that wasn't going to happen on my session.
No.
Or she would do them up so tight.
Because she couldn't feel it.
Because she couldn't feel it. Okay. And then again, that would change the way we would move, walking or doing whatever throughout that session. So at the end of every session, we'd take off her shoes and I would help her kind of almost just ascertain where she was on that day with regards to foot care. And we just came up with this simple 1 to 10 scale, 10 being really good, okay, 1 being really poor.
Yeah.
And obviously she couldn't see her feet easily or get to her feet. So she would just put her legs up on a stool, okay, and we just say, my own perception, get my words out, having worked with the seen the podiatrist do it. Is that right word?
Yeah.
Okay. And we would just say, right, about an 8 today. Go wicked. Again, we just mark that on a diary. Feet equals
It shows
8.
that the screening goes so much deeper than you first think.
And I'd see this client 3 times a week. It'd be like feet equals 7, feet equals 8, and then the once every couple of weeks or every month, the podiatrist would come in, look through the diary, and go, okay, foot care is improving.
I love how interrelated that is, especially with the podiatrist.
That went hand in hand with the more we looked after her feet, the more her food shopping basket changed.
Yeah, but
her self-belief and self-efficacy went through the roof, and she would do more and more ownership of taking control of her diabetes. And I genuinely believe that the single hinge was around the foot care.
Well, if her foot feels good, you'd feel happier to walk on it, wouldn't you? Like, I know if I've had a blister from running, for example, I don't want to walk on it, let alone run.
Yeah, completely.
So the same would apply, and that, like, knowing that has such a cyclical upward spiral effect on everything else. And also, it's worth putting that in how you're talking to your clients on session. You're not just here to kind of give them the session and let them go.
Not at all.
You could have a massive impact on their world by asking the questions you never thought you'd have to ask.
There you go. Completely.
Like whether injecting on their insulin or what foot care is.
Or what's going on with their feet.
Amazing.
And that's what I think makes an outstanding
Those little nuances,
coach.
yeah,
completely. Of just saying, right, what do I need to do? It kind of almost wasn't in the PT manual. I never thought I'd ever end up with a client where I had to, look at the underside of a client's foot and score it out of 10 in terms of happiness.
Or just ask them if you've got any pain in your feet.
Completely. Well, even that, it goes, well, I can't feel my feet. Yeah. One client actually reported, I said, what does it feel like? How would you describe it? And he said, imagine a pirate. I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, imagine a pirate with a wooden leg. It feels like I can feel my heel on my left foot, but I can't feel anything in my forefoot or toes. And on my right foot, I can't feel anything. So I feel like I'm standing on a wooden leg. I'm like, amazing. That's like, and just if you like right now, stand up and just lift, like hold yourself on the wall, balance. Okay. Take your right foot off the floor and just go on your left heel. And imagine that you had to walk around daily life, and that's all the sensation, feedback, all the afferent messages to your brain you were getting was just through your heel.
Like when you get pins and needles and all you can feel is like one part of your foot.
Yeah, and I said, well, how do you describe it? He goes, well, it's like I'm, like Mr. Wobble out of not whatever it was.
What was that? Noddy?
Noddy. Where you're constantly leaning forwards and backwards trying to find sensation. And now think of like every time you lean forwards, you're going to activate, psoas. Every time you lean back, because there's every action is an opposite or equal reaction. Now your back muscles get in and you wobble side to side. So you're going to constantly, the body is fighting just to stand upright. And we take this for granted.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing out of all the biggest things.
But there's been a lot of big things.
I think it's about empathy. It's empathy it comes down to for me. It's that deep level of empathy and rapport of what is the client experiencing right now. And not, like you said earlier, don't judge a book by its cover. Because every client's journey within these conditions is totally different.
Yeah, and as the conditions rise, you're going to see more of them. But if you're qualified to be able to work with them, But not just the qualification.
It goes beyond that.
The skill set.
We can't teach
the
you.
interest, the passion.
That's it. Yeah, we can't teach you to be interested. It's something you either have or you don't. We can't teach you to. We can teach you to be knowledgeable, but we can't. Empathy is a hard one to absorb. You either want to kind of go that extra outstanding step, or you don't.
Well, it's your values alongside it and what you bring to that client.
You know, from the people that have given feedback and literally the tens of thousands of downloads and people that give us wicked feedback every week, thank you very much. I'm going to say that you listen to this right now, what we've just described is you. You do have that extra step, that extra oomph of being outstanding, saying, I want to be that person that helps that person. And I never ever for a second considered or thought that I would have to check someone's foot, and it's not really in the manual, so to speak. But yeah, I'm that person to take that stand.
And that's because you're dedicated to more.
Completely.
Which is exactly what we stand for as well, and that's why I know you're listening to this.
Exactly. That's why you're here after 58 minutes. Amazing. So
exactly.
Is there anything else you want to add, Hayley?
I think this is our wrap-up of our type 1 and type 2 diabetes. We've explored insulin resistance.
What I want to know then is, what have you taken from today? So there's a couple of things you could do. You could jump inside our Parallel Coaching Facebook Inner Circle group. You could make a comment in there and let us know what you've learned.
Yeah.
There's going to be various social media posts on our Facebook and Instagram. You could head over and drop a comment, or you could take a picture of yourself and drop it on your Facebook, Instagram stories and let us know what you've learned.
I like those. I love seeing where people are listening from.
Completely, it does. Or you could just drop us an email. So info@parallel-coaching.com. It's all very well going to, that's really good. I really enjoyed that. It's a really good listen. That's really interesting.
But when you document what it is you learn, that's when it sticks.
Yes, completely. So we want to hear from you. At very least, you could drop that into, I'm going to ask for a 5-star review. And let us know what your favourite part of the episode has been, because the more reviews we get and the more feedback we get, we now can drive and steer FitPro Sessions Podcast in the direction that suits you as an individual.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah,
so
amazing.
Next week is going to be season 4, episode 6, which jumps into the next set of conditions.
Are we going to tell them?
No, we're not. So a little bit of a cliffhanger. There's our EastEnders. Dub, 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 whatever it is. And we will see you bright and breezy next Thursday for episode number 6.
Yes.
See you later.
Bye.
Hi, I'm Neil Bergman.
And I'm Hayley Bergman. Over the last 10 years, we've helped thousands of fitness professionals to get qualified, learn with simplicity, and coach clients with confidence.
We're the first to say that learning and being a FitPro doesn't have to be hard work, and that with the right structure, support and resources, you can become a confident and knowledgeable fitness professional that is dedicated to more.
So how do you learn, qualify and kickstart as a FitPro? This is the FitPro Sessions Podcast with Parallel Coaching.